The great Martin Buber said, "There are yes positions to life, and there are no positions to life." So tonight I want to talk to you about a yes position to life. Sometimes we get stuck in a no position. We're scared, insecure, inflexible, brittle, worried, anxious, stressed, clinging to the past, and there's a new thing that the Spirit of God wants to do, but we're stuck in no and we aren't ready for it, open, waiting, expectant. And so we hold back. We hold back with our love. We hold back with our time, with our energy, with our resources, with our money, with our encouragement, with the energies that God has given us, and we miss out on the thing that is going on. So I'd love to take a few moments and go through a few scriptures and just see if you see what I see in some of these stories about Jesus. So if you have a Bible, please turn to the book of Matthew, chapter... Let's start in 3, and then we'll go from there. And if you're following along from a Bible that was in the rack in front of you, it would be, well, actually, it's page 2. That's awesome. Page 3, actually, in the New Testament. I live, as I said, in California. For years, I lived in Michigan, and then about a year ago, we moved to California where the sun shines. And we live near the ocean, and I try to go in the ocean every day. So when I got here and saw that the hotel that I'm staying at, that you had managed to put an ocean there for me to make me feel at home, I was very moved by whoever's on the welcoming committee. That was very impressive. And I have a wife named Kristen, and we've been married for 18 years, and I'm absolutely crazy about her. I just love her, and we are having so much fun being married. And then we have 3 kids. We have a 14-year-old son, a 12-year-old son, and then we took a 9-year break, and then we had a 3-year-old girl who owns me. And she's actually just started talking, and she's got this little kitchen. We have like a little mini wooden kitchen set up in the kitchen for her, and somewhere on her iPad, she discovered SpongeBob. By the way, how many of you have seen somebody under the age of 3 using an iPad and found it terribly unnerving? Yeah, and here's what you found unnerving. They worked it better than you. And she's just started talking. You know, when kids first start talking, they just repeat phrases that they've heard. And she's trying to make Krabby Patties out of her little toy kitchen, and she can't find the little meat patty somewhere. And she had heard somebody say, "What the heck?" somewhere. And she's walking around the other day saying, "What the heck, where's my meat? Where's the heck, where's my meat?" I don't know why I tell you that, other than I had it stuck in my head because my boys think that is the funniest thing ever. My 12-year-old son, Preston, is a skateboarder. That's all he cares about. And when you skateboard, you shred your pants. Like you just shred them. And the other day he was leaving and he had holes all over his pants. And I'm telling him, we generally try and wear pants. Like I literally resorted to this. We can afford pants without holes. And he looked at me like, "Yeah, but can you skate in them?" Then I have a 14-year-old son who, I can't believe I'm saying this. He recently started writing rap songs and recording them in his room, which is not something that you're generally planning on. But here's the really interesting thing. So he'll be up in his room and you hear like a boo, boo, a boo, boo, and you think, is this my son? And he starts playing us these songs. Actually, I got somebody emailed me and said, "Did you know that your son has been recording songs?" And I said, "No, well, he's been recording them and putting them on YouTube." And as a parent, you try to keep pretty good handle on things, right? So, you know what I mean? Like if you found out that your kid had joined the circus and was somewhere, you'd kind of want to know. So I get an email, so that at breakfast I say to him, "Hey, have you been recording rap songs and putting them on YouTube?" And this is what he says. "Yeah, I thought it would be fun to do it and then have you find out some other way." So when people ask me what I do for a living, I'm a parent. And then sort of there's the other stuff in the margins. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Like, it is all hands on deck right now. So I'm here for 2 days, and I know I will go home and find out something new and fascinating and awesome. What the heck, where's my meat that's going on around there? So there's a story about Jesus. That was a segue. Jesus comes to John, verse 13, Matthew chapter 3. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have prevented him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? But Jesus answered him, let it be so now. For it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness. To which John the Baptist replied, huh? Then he consented. You wonder if John the Baptist was like, I don't really understand that answer, but you're Jesus, so I'm going to go with it. You see this often in the stories about Jesus, don't you? It's so deep and profound that you sense people going, okay. Kind of like, but you're Jesus, so I'll trust you. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up from the water, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. Now, real quick side note. Whenever you read a writer like Matthew, who is Jewish, Matthew is writing to a Jewish audience, and he wants his Jewish audience to know Jesus is king. And king was a big idea in the first century Jewish world because you had David. And David had said, one will come after me who is way superior. So you had this expectancy within first century Jewish culture that someone was coming, a Messiah, a Savior, a Lord was coming. And everything for them came from this Jewish tradition that spoke about this. So when you see interesting words together, like there is water, and Jesus enters water, and the Spirit of God descends like a dove and alights on him. What's really interesting is the Bible begins with a creation poem, and the same phrase here, roughly translated back from the Greek into the Hebrew, speaks of there was water, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the water, is how one translation says it, which refers to the ruffling of the wings of a bird. So the creation story in Genesis begins, and a Jewish audience of Matthew would have known this creation story. The creation of the world begins with this water, and then the Spirit of God, much like the imagery of a bird, descends into the water and then begins out of the water to bring beauty and order and design. So when Matthew is telling you about Jesus, and he's telling you about the beginning of Jesus' ministry, what does he have Jesus doing? He has Jesus descending into the water, and he mentions the Spirit is there hovering like a dove over the waters. Now, if you're his very, very, very clever Jewish audience, you realize, what is Matthew doing? Matthew is making a reference in this story about Jesus to the creation story. And what is he saying, essentially? There's a new creation going down. There's a new creation. This Jesus has come to enter into the chaos of the waters of the world and then bring about a whole new creation. Are you with me? Can I get an amen? Amen. Oh, wow, Episcopalians, amen. That's sweet. I thought maybe there'll be some crickets there. Can I get an amen? That crickets is preacher talk for just quiet. Oh, yeah. So the story that Matthew's telling is working on several different levels. He's telling you about this Jesus, but he's also saying God is up to something new. There's a new creation bursting forth through this Jesus. What this Jesus wants to do is enter into the chaos of the waters of the world, the waters and chaos of your life and my life, and out of it bring something new with order and beauty and design to it. Are you with me? So he's telling one story, and then there's a whole other story just below the surface. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my boy, the beloved." Some say, "This is my son, whom I love." Some translations, "with whom I am well pleased." Now, really, really basic observation from the story. This is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. He hasn't, that we know of from the way Matthew is telling the story, healed anybody yet, correct? We don't know about any large crowds. We don't know about any sermons. We don't know about any great movement or revolution. He doesn't even have a website. So we are at the front end of his ministry. We would say, well, he's just getting going. He hasn't really accomplished anything yet. I mean, he's Jesus. Well played there. But he really hasn't, done the stuff. But what is the divine voice? Speaks this word of blessing. This is my son. With him I am well pleased. So everything that we're going to see Jesus do, the beginning and the story that we're told, is he lives fully in the blessing of the Heavenly Father who says, this is my son, and before he accomplishes anything, before he achieves anything, before he does anything great, let me tell you something. With him, I am well pleased. The beginning point of any authentic, sustaining spirituality that might actually change your life is the primal blessing of God spoken over every one of us. This is my daughter. With her, I am well pleased. This is my son. Now he snores and he's kind of messy and he's got some stuff in the past. He's got some skeletons. What do you tell you right now? With him, I am well pleased. We live our lives racing after this blessing, do we not? If I just was successful enough, if I just had enough of that, if we could just get that, if I could just earn the approval of them, if I could just get that corner office, if our kids were just shiny, happy, and impressive enough, then I would feel that deep-seated hole being filled. But in this story, what we see is Jesus as a picture of humanity coming to say, I come to tell you about the God who desperately wants to bless you exactly as you are in all of your son and daughterness. This is my son. This is my daughter. This is my boy. This is my girl. With her, with him, I am well pleased. Is there anybody who needs that word of blessing tonight? You are haunted by all of the things that you aren't. You have the things that perhaps you didn't do too well, and they're sort of lugging around behind you like a big crate full of buckets and pans and rocks and all sorts of loud, obnoxious noises. Is there anything that goes on in your head, just a voice, like a tape loop that tells you what you aren't, what you won't be, the ways you don't measure up, the ways you haven't done it the way you were supposed to? All true, authentic Jesus spirituality will always begin, first and foremost, with our centered receiving of this blessing. Do you know anybody who needs to hear this word? Sometimes this is the word that we bring to each other. How many of you ever had this sort of word spoken over you by anybody else? And it was this moment of validation, and they essentially stood in and said, I want to show you what God's like, and then they blessed you. This is my son. This is my daughter. Now, we have Jesus' ministry starts, and he heads into the wilderness, and then he goes through Galilee. Verse 18, he walks by the Sea of Galilee. He sees two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, come, follow me, and I will make you fish for people. So at the heart of the Christian story is this invitation to come follow him. And he doesn't tell you where he's going to go. When he calls Peter and Andrew, he does not have a brochure. There is no, this is where we're going. Okay, it's going to be 2 weeks. We're staying in 4 stars. And there'll be a bus that moves us from location to location. And there'll be a buffet every evening. What more could you want? He doesn't give anything. What he gets is, come follow me. Come follow me. That's what you get. That's what you get. That's what we get. When I was a kid, my parents are Christians, and they would take us to church. And I was fascinated with these stories of Jesus. Because he kept insisting that God loves every one of us exactly as we are. And that blew my mind. And he kept insisting that there was a whole other way to see the world. Because I lived in a world that was built around hierarchy. There were the cool kids and the not cool kids, the popular kids and the not popular kids. Totally different than how the world is now. I will never forget one kid saying to me, "You're not invited to that party because you're not popular." What's fuzzy about that? Isn't it funny, by the way, how things are spoken to you in junior high and you remember them? How many of you remember them years later? They have these strange moments. You become CEO of the company and realize it's all about that kid on the football team in 7th grade. And you're like, am I still trying to impress? Never mind. So, and I was fascinated with the dangerous message that he had, because there was this world I lived in that said, this is the way it works. Here is the hierarchy. Here are the points. Here is how the scoreboard works. And then the stories about Jesus, he went, and all the people who you weren't supposed to touch, lepers, he would touch. It was almost like with the Pharisees, Jesus would say, like, we're not supposed to touch them, right? We're not supposed to touch them, right? Right, we can't touch them. It's just this. Oh, and then there was the people you can dine with and the people you can't dine with. And in the first century, that had serious political ramifications. Like when you dined with somebody, when you had table fellowship with them, that meant that you considered them in, essentially. And the people in Jesus' day, the religious systems, had very, very, very complicated systems for deciding who's in and who's out, who's Orthodox, who's not, who's with us, who's not, who's in the camp, who's not. Once again, very different than today. By the way, can I tell you a story? Okay. You're not even going to believe this story is true, but it's true. There is a chain of bookstores that was going to ban my books because they were too controversial. Because Jesus isn't. Isn't that funny? No, seriously, if you're going to follow the controversial Jesus, you can't be like him. So what they said, but then of course they wanted to sell the books and make money. So they decided we're going to put a sticker on Rob Bell's books. And the sticker is going to say, "Read with discernment." How awesome is that? You seriously can't make this stuff up. Because you're not supposed to read any other books with discernment. Just this one. We're going to put this on the shelf next to, you know. And so it made me laugh so hard. And so I have this friend who's an actor, and we were talking, like, we should make, because that was one of those things where, like, you're just, I was like, we should make a movie. And there's a Borat episode when he goes to the grocery store and there's a whole wall of cheese, and he asks to see the manager, and he points to the one kind of cheese and says, "Is this cheese?" Have anybody seen this clip? And the manager's like, "Yes, this is cheese." Then he goes to the next package. "Is this cheese?" "Is this cheese?" And he goes down the whole wall of, "Is this cheese? Is this cheese?" If you've seen it, it's funny. If you're not, my apologies for the past 30 seconds. So I was like, oh, here's what we'll do. My friend, the actor, will film a movie of the cash register of a bookstore, and my friend will walk up to the cash register and pretending like he's going to buy a whole bunch of books, and there'll be a cashier, and then he'll put the first book down and he'll say, "Do I need to read this with discernment?" And then the cashier will say no, and then he'll go to the next book and say, "Do I need to read this with discernment?" And the cashier will say no. "Do I need to read this?" And then one of the books will be the Bible, and he'll say, "Do I need to read this with discernment?" And the cashier will say no, and he'll say, "But I had stories about war and death and rape and incest and genocide. And, I mean, should I read this with discernment?" And the cashier says no, and he says, "Why not?" And the cashier says, "Because it doesn't have a sticker." How awesome is that? It doesn't have a sticker. Does it have a sticker? I had a point there. I don't know what it was. Oh, yes. I found this Jesus so compelling and captivating because he said in this highly organized, hierarchical world that I lived in, where everybody was endlessly jockeying to find out where you stand, He spoke of everything upside down. He even said things like, oh, the first will be last, and the last will be first. It was so profound. It was like the wisdom after wisdom. There was like the conventional wisdom of how the world works. And then Jesus brought this whole other kind of wisdom. In his story in which he's crucified on the cross, and yet you find out that's not the last word that's spoken about him. And then in resurrection, it was like, wait. When he seems to be at his weakest is actually the moment at which he is at his strongest. And then in this story, he insisted that when you're down on your knees as weak as possible, and it seems like everything is over, in that exact moment, you may be the closest ever to resurrection. When there's Friday, you have no idea if a Sunday is just around the corner. This story absolutely, it captivated me. And as a kid, it really made an impression on me. And what always struck me was we would go and we would visit a church, or we would go to a church, and it struck me like that somehow the institution that claimed Jesus, I wasn't quite sure if he claimed them, different story. It seemed like they'd taken this unbelievably beautiful, powerful message about life and hope and forgiveness and freedom and liberation, and they had somehow managed to somehow make it boring, which seemed to me to take more skill than actually making it interesting. How do you take this message? How do you take this, come follow me? Come follow me. It is going to be awesome. Come follow me. Well, where are we going to go? We'll find out. I mean, that's what's going on right here in the text, correct? Probably now if you're a disciple and they're fishermen, which fishermen in the first century means that they are probably apprenticing. Generally, you would apprentice sometime in your teenage years. You would begin apprenticing with your father's, with a family business. So when they're fishing, some of them may have been older. Generally, disciples were in their late teens, early 20s. Remember, a girl would often begin to be prepared to be married like 13, 14. So, and a boy then would be a little farther along in order to be able to provide, but you're talking late teens. And you can argue, you can make a legitimate argument that disciples in this day would have been early 20s, late teens. Now, we all know the Easter pageant where they're like 35 and have beards and leg hair. But that's like that's probably not the best way to think about it. They're young. They're young. And then there's some thought that the best of the best of the best of the best would become rabbis or scribes or teachers of the law, devote themselves essentially full-time. Some would devote themselves to the teaching of Scripture and to a trade, but they're fishermen, so these may not have been the best of the best of the best, which gives me great hope. And so he said, then follow me. Follow me. Follow me. Follow me. We become fixated on our lives going a particular direction. We make a plan. We make a 3-year plan, an 8-year plan. I was just talking to a pastor. Now he is I talked to him, what day is today? Friday, Wednesday. He's 34. When he was 26, he started a church in Seattle from scratch in his living room with his wife. They now have thousands and thousands and thousands of people coming. He said so many people that they now have to have other campuses. They're finding other buildings and then taking his sermons and putting them on video on these other sermons. They have 8 other buildings where people are gathering. Thousands of people are gathering in other buildings just to watch his sermon on video. He's 34, has 4 young kids. And he calls me and he just says, everybody wants to know what the 5-year plan is for the church. Because now we're up and running and we have a standing in the community and we have to have some order. We have to have, and everybody wants to know, what's your 5-year plan? He's like, I don't have a 5-day plan. He said, I started this because Jesus said, follow me. I started this because I had this profound sense that Jesus wanted to do something in our city. So I just did it. And I got some friends and we started in our living room. And we started talking about this new message of Jesus. And then we got involved in some getting people who don't have access to clean drinking water projects in Africa. And he says, and then we got involved in the arts. And then then I was just teaching the Bible and just sharing people what I was learning. And he says, it was just come follow me. Okay, so I did. And now he says, for some reason, this whole big, massive organization, there are 44 people on the payroll. He says they want to know what's the 5-year thing. And he says the problem with the 5-year thing is that isn't what got us here. What got us here was, come follow me. So we try this, and we try this, and we try this. How many of you are part of a church? Interesting, because we're in a church. Do you understand that when you join up with a church is made up of followers of Jesus, keyword being followers, and that means you're signing up to follow Jesus as a community and try and discern where they're headed, but you don't get to have your hands ultimately on the steering wheel. Are you with me? And sometimes what happens is this thing creeps in like, whoa, 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 this is the way we do it. But I wonder if Jesus, and there's, hey, we have a tradition here. Ooh. We put the things in there. And we do it because Ethyl did it. Do you want to answer to Ethyl? I call it the Ethyl Factor. There's always all these things that go on in a church that are done a particular way, and you find out it's because, well, Ethyl organized it that way. How many of you know what I'm talking about? We don't quite know why we do it this way. We just know that this is the way it's supposed to be done. And this is the challenge of a church. There are these moments in the life of a church, and everybody has to go back and do this. He said, follow me. So right now we're clinging to a bunch of stuff. And some of the stuff we may be clinging to might actually be in the way. And we're dragging around all this stuff. And when he comes to these fishermen, he's like, okay, you got to drop that. You got to drop. Can I bring my nets? I mean, this is no, seriously. So no, I can carry them. No, it's a problem. Really? Okay, we're going to walk 18 miles to Judea. Okay, my nets are a little heavy, and we haven't seen water in 4 days. Yeah, your nets are a little silly right now. Sometimes churches, it's like a whole net carrying around club. Like, oh, we got our nets. We haven't, and it's not working. And so sometimes what happens, you can see in the life of an institution, is you can see this moment like, whoa, wait. He said, come follow me. This might be one of those moments. Is everybody ready to let go of whatever it is? Okay. Because now we can actually follow him. When I got to college, some guys in the dorm room next to me were really good musicians, and they were looking for a singer, and I volunteered, like you do. And I started writing these songs and trying to sing them, and I'd never done anything like this before, and it kind of worked. And we developed like this little following, and we had this old James Brown routine. It was classic sort of college arty nonsense, and it was delightful. And so I began to think this is what I was going to do with my life. And I got really focused on we're going to go and we're going to, as a band, we're going to live in one apartment. We're going to eat crackers. And then when we make it, we're going to be able to tell that story about living in that little apartment in squalor, right? We're going to be starving artists, so then later we can tell the story about being starving artists, like making the story up properly. And my senior year of college, I got viral meningitis, which is this brain infection where the fluid around your brain gets infected, it swells up, and it squeezes your brain. When the doctor told me that, I was like, oh, so that's what that was. And the band broke up in my senior year of college. There was no plan B. And I remember walking around the college campus utterly lost. It's like when you're playing soccer and you're on offense and you come down and you almost score a goal, but one of the defenders comes up and clears the ball to the end of the field. But the problem when the defender goes to clear the ball is you're the offensive player and you're in the way of the defender, and the ball goes right into your midsection and your voice goes up 2 octaves, and you're like, it was the existential equivalent of that. It was this feeling. That was a stretch, but it was enjoyable. It was this feeling like, oh, I thought I knew where my life was headed, and it just blew up into 1,000 pieces. And it was around this time, literally people that I barely knew, I'd like see them in the dining hall, and they'd walk by, and they'd say, like, hey, have you thought about being a pastor? And then just keep walking. It was that sort of eerie. Like, have you thought about being a pastor? Have you thought about being a pastor? And I remember walking down the sidewalk and realizing that there was some sort of tug and that I needed to say yes, and I needed to go study theology. And I hadn't been a very good student, to say the least. I had a bit of restless creative energy, and class didn't seem to be the best outlet for that. Actually, my wife, my future wife at the time, was a teaching assistant, because she did quite well. And she was a teaching assistant for a class that I had. And one of her jobs was to grade papers in those mechanized grading machines where you fill out the bubbles, and then they feed the bubbles into the machine, and then it does all the grading for the professor. And she told a story one time about grading papers for the class exam that I was in. And she said all of a sudden the machine just started going and shaking and beeping like continuously. And she was like, oh my word, what student did this poorly? And she pulled it out, and it was me. And she loves me. And so I enrolled in one seminary, and I got in, which raises questions to me about that seminary. And the summer after college, I was teaching water skiing at a camp in Wisconsin. And the people who were in charge of the waterfront were supposed to run a chapel service for all the people who worked at the camp. And so I said, well, I'll give the sermon. Do you ever say something, and as the words are in the air, you're sort of like, I did not just say that. Like, sure, we'll have the party at our house. Right? Driving home with your spouse, our house. And so I put together a sermon, although I had never done anything like this. How does one put together a sermon? Do you read the Bible and then just think? They didn't have DesperatePreacher.com at that point. This was pre-internet. So I remember sitting there thinking, I don't know how this works. And literally these prayers sort of, God, I'm asking you to maybe give me something to say to these people, because I've never done anything like this. And I remember I stood up to give the sermon, and I was wearing Birkenstocks at the time, and I became overwhelmed that I needed to take off my sandals, that I was on holy ground, and that my life was never going to be the same again. I refer to it as being born again. It was this moment, like, I was sort of a restless, energetic sort of, I want to do something with my life. And it was like I came home. And the sermon began with a story about a kid who was hung by the branch of a tree by his underwear. So it was that level of homiletics. I somehow connected a kid being hung on a tree by his underwear with Sabbath and the need of his counselor to take a Sabbath, which I realize now is kind of clever in its oddness. And then I went to seminary, and then I got an internship at a church, and I started working in this church, and I asked them, I want to fully experience all of this pastor thing. So anytime somebody is suicidal or in trouble or violent, or if there's ever anybody out in the lobby who looks like they're going to hurt somebody, please send them to me. And if there's anybody, and I remember going to I said, I want to visit people in prison. I want to. And so I remember this was like 1995, doing funerals for people who have died of AIDS. And I remember going to visit a guy in the jail, and they locked me in this room to meet with the guy, and there were video cameras there. And I said, why are there video cameras? And they said, well, this guy is in 24-hour lockdown. And I said, why is that? They said, because he's violent and he may kill somebody, and we need to have constant surveillance. I said, yeah, but you're like over there. And I'm all alone in this room. And you're telling me the reason why he's on this 24-hour lockdown is because he's seriously violent and could hurt somebody, and now you're going to lock me in this room with him. And the guy said, yeah, I mean, I'll be able to watch it on camera. But it's just this endless process of learning and seeing what Jesus was up to. And a man came up to me after one of my first sermons, and he said, my name is George, and I run the AA meetings in town, and you need to start coming to AA. And I said, well, I'm not aware that I have a problem with alcohol. And he said, you need to come to AA to see what a church looks like. So I said, when they come to your turn, just say, I'm Rob and I pass. So I started going to AA meetings, and I learned what it's like when people stop pretending. And I learned what it's like when people surrender themselves. And I learned what it's like when people hit rock bottom. Because when they hit rock bottom and they're done pretending and masking and posturing, when they hit rock bottom and they almost die, the only hope is to turn everything over to God. And I saw what happens when you're in a room full of people and none of them have any energy left to pretend that things are fine. I got to be in a room where everybody was being ruthlessly honest about their own shortcomings. And I thought, wow, that's like kind of more church than church. And then I had the sense like maybe I ought to start something like a church. And what if it was like a new kind of place where you could come exactly as you are? And so there was this guy who had this building, and he had just finished this warehouse building, and I convinced him to rent it to me for $1 a year. And not a bad, I'm not making the story up. That's the funny part about it. I tell it now, and I'm like, he's making that up. Wait, it's me. It happened. And so I told the people where the church I was at, I have the sense that there's a new thing, and we're supposed to listen to what Jesus is doing, and I'm supposed to start something new. And I love what you are doing here, but there are more people to reach. Are you with me? Are you with me, Clearwater? Are you with me, Church of the Ascension? There are more people to reach. There are more people to reach. It's not like you get like a club and then go, hey, we're done. Where's the fun in that? Are you with me? Like, I think there are people, this beautiful thing happening here, but I have a sense that there are people who aren't listening, and we need to figure out how to engage them. So we started meeting in this warehouse, and the people started coming, and people started, like, giving, and they sensed that something was happening. And so we did a baptism service, and people were coming. We did it at a lake because we didn't have our own building, because we were renting a warehouse for $1 a year. And people started coming to the we did a baptism service, and people started showing up for the baptism. But what had happened is something had gone wrong in the lake with the chemicals, and it had killed the fish. And the area where we were going to baptize was solid dead fish. And so we literally, I remember Don Dykstra got on his hunting waders. Always good in a church to have somebody who owns hunting waders. And literally they're pushing the dead fish out of the way so that we can baptize people. Because you are a new creation even though you smell. And I remember people were coming down the hill fully dressed, saying, I don't know what's happening here, but it has to be of God. And Jesus, this has to be about Jesus. And will you just baptize me right now in my clothes? We're baptizing like 100, 150, 200 people at a time. People were coming down after a church service with their wallets and emptying their wallets and saying, all I know is I have to say yes to whatever God is doing in this place and in me. And for me right now, that means making sure that money doesn't have a hold on me. So just take it. Just take it. I remember literally being like, oh, wait, don't put it in your pockets, Rob. That's where you get in trouble. What do you do when people start responding to the movement so strongly? And so I thought, well, we had a huge parking problem, and I thought, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. We got to figure out who's serious here, and we don't have enough room. I know what I'll do. So I announced I was going to preach through the book of Leviticus verse by verse. So for a year and a half, I preached through the book of Leviticus verse by verse. And we reenacted the sacrifices, not with real animals. And we had people dressed up as priests, and we had, we built this big altar out of fire to try to recreate Leviticus chapter 16. But the guy who did it, the hose with the gas going to the giant fire flamethrower thing leaked. So I noticed partway through the sermon, people in the front row were getting sort of glazed over. This is what we did, because you just follow. You follow. You follow, and you try to get wise counsel around you, and you look to church tradition to see how this movement has evolved and moved forward over the years, and you read the stories about Jesus because you want to make sure you're in the flow of this story, and then you just go for it. Are you with me? And then you just go for it. Come, follow me, he says. Sometimes when I meet people who are bored, sometimes when I meet people who have everything that the American dream said we're supposed to have, sometimes when I meet people who have been successful and they have a nice life and they have food and Wi-Fi and car insurance and they take a nice vacation and they have enough money for some Christmas presents, everything's fine. But there's like a gnawing boredom somewhere in there. Sometimes I'll just say to them, well, what Jesus says is he says, come follow me. So in some senses, he's always saying that to each of us. And it might not mean moving to Africa, and it might not mean, but it might mean something as simple as having a really risky conversation with a neighbor. It might mean something as risky as inviting somebody to come along on something with you. It might mean simply inviting somebody to your house for dinner, and they have no idea why you're doing it, and you don't know, other than you know that if you take this step and you invite those people, you've driven by their house because it's 3 doors down now for 17 years, but you've never actually just said, why don't you come over and tell us about your life? And they don't know what is going on here, other than you know this is some sort of risky Jesus-y step. I use that word specifically, Jesus-y. You don't exactly know why, you don't know what's that, you just know, you intuitively sense that there is life here. There is some risk, some leap, something here, and I need to do it because somehow in the course of that, we will encounter God in a new way, and who knows what will happen after that. Sometimes it's the big things, sometimes it's the small things. A year ago, my family and I moved from Grand Rapids, Michigan to the Los Angeles area. Not the usual move, but we did it out of this overwhelming sense that there was something new God was doing in our lives and we needed to follow. And we had planted this church, and we were there for 12 years, and it was extraordinary. We were a year and a half into the life of the church that we started, and we had totally outgrown the building that we're in, and somebody said, well, I could give you my mall. And so we said, okay. And so a guy gave us his mall. And we turned the stores into children's classrooms, and it was 150,000 square feet. We called it a loser mall. You know that mall that only has 3 stores in it, and there more people come to walk and to the RV show than actually come to buy things? Like it was that. And so we took over a mall, and we gutted one end and made a meeting room. I remember the first Sunday, staying there, and a guy comes in who'd grown up in that town, and he walks in to the worship center, which was a bunch of stores previously. He walks in, and he walks over to one place, and he says, I used to shoplift right here. And so you just go, and you just follow, and you just follow. Now notice this, verse chapter 5. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. So what Jesus calls is he calls these fishermen to be his disciples, to follow him. And then he calls more and more of them to be his disciples. Now, the first century rabbinic system was fascinating. A rabbi had what is called a yoke. Let me hear you say yoke. A yoke was that rabbi's particular set of interpretations. Now, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, were called the Torah. Let me hear you say Torah. Now, Torah, the first 5 books, was considered the path or the way. They referred to Torah sometimes as the way. Sometimes they referred to Torah as the truth. Other times they referred to Torah as life. Interesting. So for a good first century Orthodox Jewish person, Torah was the center of life. In the Torah were 613 commands. And so everything in life was about how do we live these commands. And so at an early age, children, the rabbi would place honey on the tongue of a child and say, may the words of Torah be sweet like honey on your tongue. It was believed that the words were like life, that they were where the life is found. And so on Sabbath, on Saturday, you would go. Now, you did not have your own copy of Torah because a printing press comes 5,015 years later. 1,427 years later. So you did not have a copy of the Scriptures. When you went to a hotel in the first century, the Gideons had not been there first. So probably your small village had a copy of the Torah Scroll. And the Torah Scroll would have been written in Hebrew, so it would have been written from right to left, and it was rolled up on two wooden posts, essentially, sticks that you would roll together, and those sticks were called the trees of life. And so the Torah Scroll was kept in a cabinet over in the corner of the synagogue, and the place where the Torah Scroll was read was in the middle of the synagogue. So you would go on Shabbat, on Sabbath, with your family to the local synagogue for what are called prayers. So we would say a worship service. They would say prayer service. Then there came the time for the reading of the Scriptures. And so each synagogue had a hazan, which was like sort of the organizer, the administrator. So in Jairus, the synagogue ruler comes to see Jesus. He's the hazan. He's the sort of kind of guy keeping it all straight. So when time came for the reading, the hazan would go over to the cabinet, grab the scroll, and then you would begin to clap and sing while the hazan would dance through the congregation with the words of Torah. Because Torah is life. Torah is vitality. Torah is dance. God has spoken. The rest is commentary. And we're now going to hear the life-giving words. We're going to hear, they referred to Torah as the blueprint of the universe. There's all sorts of fascinating mystic commentary on what Torah stood for. And so the hazan would move through the people, and you would dance, and you would sing, and you would stomp, and you would clap, because this God, the God that we know, has spoken and come near and has not left us detached and abandoned, but has said, I will give you life. Are you with me? So as a kid, you began learning Torah. Some believe that most people would have Torah memorized. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. There's even a whole tradition where each word in the Hebrew alphabet had a number. So in our alphabet, A is 1, B is 2, C is 3. Each of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet has a number corresponding to its order. So if you take those numbers, a word then would have a numerical value because it would be these three letters. If you add those three letters and their numbers up, you would get 27. There are discussions you can find to this day of rabbis who will discuss Torah based on numbers. Yes, God is righteous, 172. 172 is also the divine is with us every day. Ah, yes, but half of 172 is 172. It's mind-blowing. By the way, have you ever noticed that Jesus will quote an Old Testament passage and he only quotes half the verse? And then they want to kill him? It's because everybody knows the Scripture. Everybody knows it. So that what they've done is they've filled in the rest of the verse and they've realized what he's actually saying. So often they're called remezes. There are like 22 of them. Maybe we should do one of them later. It's where Jesus only quotes the first part and not the second part. And so the crowd fills in the second part because they all know it and realize that what he's saying is a very sort of damning indictment of them and their hypocrisy or their pharisaical ways. And that's why they're so cranked up. Very, very brilliant stuff going on there. And so the Hazan is dancing Torah through. So then different rabbis had different yokes because different rabbis had different interpretations of how you actually live Torah. Because for them, Torah was not an intellectual exercise in doctrine, dogma, and having your mental furniture arranged properly. Are you with me? For them, Torah was how you live. So like in the Psalms, when it says taste and see, it doesn't say cognitively analyze with your cerebrum and see. It says taste And so for them, the experience of God wasn't just getting the right propositions organized. It was your living, breathing experience of the world that they believed was God's and everything in it. They referred to the table in the home as every table is an altar. And by the way, in the first century Jewish culture, from what we can see from the records, it's pretty clear that the ruler in the home, the worship leader in the home, was the woman. Are you with me now, ladies? Because we all know who runs the place anyway. They were just honest about it. So, for them, every table is an altar. When you gather for a meal, food keeps you alive. So food is the most visceral gift we all have. We have breath and we have food that keep us alive. And food is a tangible sign of God's blessing. And so when you gather around the table, it wasn't just a table. It was a celebration. It was an act of worship. It was a let's eat some good food to remind ourselves how good God is. And so everything, all of life was thought of as holy. You didn't necessarily go to the synagogue because it was a holy place and every place else was common. You went to the synagogue to be reminded again that all of life is sacred and holy. And so different rabbis had different interpretations. And so some rabbis, it was all about the poor. And so when you went to a rabbi, the question that you would ask a rabbi is, Rabbi, teach us to pray. And then the rabbi would begin praying, and you would begin praying with, and the way that the rabbi prayed told you how that rabbi understood Torah. Some emphasized the poor. Some emphasized the holiness of all things. This one rabbi came along, and the question that was asked of rabbis, you'd always ask, is, what's the greatest commandment? Because there were 613. So the way that that rabbi answered told you sort of what was the most important thing to that rabbi. Nowadays, when we talk about, this is kind of a lame analogy, but when we talk about Christian denominations, we want to kind of sense what the emphasis is, correct? So in those days, you would say to a rabbi, Rabbi, what's the greatest commandment? And the way that that rabbi responded sort of told you what was most important. There was one rabbi who said, oh, the greatest commandment? There's two of them, love God and love others. You should check him out. Very interesting other things he had to say. That was Jesus. That was a joke. It didn't work. Yeah, so when he's asked what's the greatest commandment, this was a hot-button issue of the day because each rabbi sort of had their yoke, and the goal was to defend your yoke and to argue your yoke. And you actually find all these fascinating, there are a number of first-century documents still around showing rabbis arguing about Rabbi so-and-so who takes upon him the yoke of so-and-so, and in the name of so-and-so argues against so-and-so who's misunderstood Psalm 17 because of what Rabbi so-and-so says. So when Jesus gets asked a lot of these questions, he's being asked very sensible, straightforward questions that all rabbis were asked. Teach us how to pray. What's the greatest commandment? And there was actually like a story about building your house on sand versus building your house on rock. The rabbis, the goal with the rabbi, I think you Episcopalians have this way ahead of other people. The goal was that the sermon would be brief. It was actually believed, this is interesting. It was actually believed that there is simplicity, then there is complexity. It was believed, and I think this has tremendous relevance for communication in our day, that then there was a simplicity after complexity. Like there is, yeah, God loves you and opens God's arms to you. Simplicity. Then there is complexity. Well, there is this kind of love and this kind of love, isn't it? And then there is the simplicity after that complexity. A man had two sons. And the one son said to the father, give me my share of the inheritance. And he took a share of the inheritance and he squandered it. Then one day he realized it'd be better with my father. And he came home and his dad was in the driveway waiting for him. And he was on his way home, rehearsing his speech. And he was going to say to his father, I'm not even worthy to be your son. I can't even be your son. I can't even worthy. But his father was there in the driveway, my version. His father was there and said, put a robe on him, give him a ring. Those are signs of sonship. So the son had his version of his story. I'm not even any longer worthy to be your son. But then the father has a different version of the son's story. You're my boy, and I'm welcoming you home. And so it's simple, and yet it's fantastically complex. Like that story, the parable of the prodigal son. How many of you at different points of your life have been the prodigal son wandering home? Yeah. How many of you have been the big brother and we're like, no way, that's not fair? Yeah, and those of you who are like, not me, busted. How many of you at one point have been the father blessing someone and welcoming them home? How many of you have been a villager going, that is one dysfunctional family? Yeah. Now this interesting. So when you followed a rabbi, and this is really crucial to understanding the whole rabbinic system in the New Testament. When you followed a rabbi, it wasn't so that you know what the rabbi knows. For many of us, we are so deeply shaped by Western education, which is very Greek in its orientation, which is how much you know. In my ordination exam, to become a pastor, they asked me, I remember getting asked questions like, what if we were to discover that there was a 3rd Corinthians that we didn't know existed? Real relevant stuff. And I remember one question I got wrong in my ordination, which lasted all afternoon, but it was like dog years. You know what I mean? It actually felt like 5 years, but it was 3 hours. I remember one question I got wrong because I made an improper distinction between ontological and ministerial function, which I know a lot of you, that's on your hearts. But what's interesting in my ordination, they never said, are you a good husband? What do your neighbors who aren't Christians say about you? Actually, we're going to go ask them. Tell us about somebody who's wronged you who you have forgiven. Tell us, show us how you've spent your money over the past year. Not to be nosy, but just how do you live? Because that's kind of the thing. If you're going to lead people in the art of living, how are you? There was never any of those questions. It was, what do you think about these doctrinal dogma things? And sometimes we take this sort of modern Western way of thinking about things and we put that back onto Jesus and, oh look, see, Jesus comes to make sure that we get it all lined up. But what's interesting is that for a rabbi, when you called a disciple because you believed that this disciple had the potential to do what you do. That's why you called a disciple. The disciple wasn't, so that I can know all the things the rabbi knows, or so that I can learn like the professor learns. It was to be able to do what the rabbi does. This is why Jesus says these astounding things like, you'll do greater things than these. Whoa, what? You'll go to the ends of the earth and make disciples. He wouldn't have chosen them unless he believed that they could actually do what he does. So the Christian story begins with a master teacher who calls these bumbling, I always refer to Peter as the caffeinated disciple, just these sort of provincial, local, probably some of them in their late teens, early 20s. One of them's a tax collector. I mean, he calls the oddest cross-section of humanity and says, now I'm going to teach you how to do what I do. That's the story that unfolds here. Now, there are a couple things that are quite powerful, especially for a church. If it's a church of Christians, then they're followers and they're disciples, and disciples are students of life. And a student isn't expected to get it right the first time. Are you with me? You're learning. Now, when you're a student and you're learning, you first and foremost have a position of humility. I'm learning. And I trust the teacher. I'm all in. I double down on this teacher. But I'm learning. So when you do stumble and fall, you don't beat yourself up because you're a disciple. Does anybody need to hear this word tonight? When you're raising kids and you're a disciple, you're learning how to raise kids. Are you with me? Yeah. When you're running a business, I wonder if there's anybody here tonight, when you're running a business and every day as a Christian you run into really sticky, ambiguous, I don't know what the right move is here, because you have this one bottom line, money, but then you've got these other bottom lines because you care about more than just money. Are you with me? By the way, to all of you who are in business and you struggle every day, you have these sorts of ethical questions of, I don't know what the right move is here. The tension that you feel means that you're being true to the call. If you didn't have this tension, then you'd be in trouble. Are you with me? The tension means you're in the game. The tension means it's one thing just to withdraw and live in a sort of sealed off world where you don't have to actually get down and dirty with the world the way it is. The other tension is just, man, I'm here to make money and crush everybody in my sight. And the people within this business that we run and everything, they're just cogs and wheels, and that's just how it works in business. And then you sort of isolate. There's my life in the real world, and then there's I come on Sundays and I have this other thing. But if you're not going to do either of these, and you're actually going to figure, I'm a student, I'm a disciple, and I'm trying to figure out what it means to work in the real world in business, medicine, education, law, real estate, burrito making. If you're going to actually be a disciple, then you're going to face tensions every day, and that's not only normal, that tension is a sign that you're actually trying to figure out, and it's okay, because some dilemmas don't have an easy answer. That's just how it is. And sometimes when the Christian church becomes, well, just pray about it and get wise counsel and make a move, and it makes it almost sound, what can happen is it's like, man, what's wrong with me? Why am I having so much hard time with other people? Apparently they just pray and it works out. It's tough, and that's the way it is. It means you're in the game. Are you with me? Yeah, and so we're disciples. We're students. And we're learning how to live this out. The rabbi says, come, follow me. Because the rabbi believes that you can actually do it. Now, we can probably take a break. Does that sound good? I just want to stick to your time schedule. I submit to you. That's an hour and 15 minutes. And then sometimes I don't. So anyway, there's a bunch of other things. Should go for a little bit longer? See, the thing about it I've learned is I'll just talk forever, and my wife will be like, Rob, people have bladders. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. Well, you know, we should do another thing. So we should take a break at some point. Yeah. Okay, but I can keep going for a little bit longer? Okay. You want to have some fun? Okay, now, here's what's key to understanding about when Jesus then begins teaching. And in the next part that we're going to look at, he calls his disciples, and he begins in chapter 5, Sermon on the Mount. So he's giving them a new, fresh word about life in the world. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak, and he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, there's all sorts of fascinating discussion about the Sermon on the Mount. There's lots of different ways to read it, and they're great, great people over the years in our tradition who have offered all sorts of insights. There's one way of understanding these Beatitudes, particularly the first one, Blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, this is gospel. When he says poor in spirit, the great philosopher Dallas Willard says, you have to understand the poor in spirit are the zeros, the lame, the pathetic, the people who haven't gotten it all figured out. I would say, parentheses, us. Blessed. Now, there are different ways to translate this word blessed as it comes out of the Greek language. Some say blessed means fortunate. Others say, well, the word really means happy, but happy in our culture sort of means happy and loses some of the... There's one scholar who says the way to understand blessed is blessed was a first century way of saying God is on your side, which I like. It's got a little something. It's got a little melody to it. It's got a little to it. Blessed are the poor in spirit. God is saying to you, I am on your side. Now, the poor in spirit are those who don't have it all together. So you and I know law. Law says, fortunate are all the people who understand how much they need God, who are humble, who are righteous, who are disciplined, who say their prayers at 5 a.m. We know what law is, and law is all the good, righteous, moral people with incredible self-control and impulse control. They're the ones who get the right stuff. Gospel, which Jesus brings, is something else. Law says, get your act together, and then you're in. Gospel says that God meets you exactly in the place where you do not have your act together. And it is in that moment, in that place, where God says, blessed are you, I am on your side. See, for many of us, this is profoundly counterintuitive because you and I know law. And so what happens is law seeps into the Jesus message, and it seeps into what people call gospel as, if you do this, this, and this, then God will meet you. And we all go, okay, this is back to the spiritual people get the stuff, and the rest of us are sort of out in the cold. That's law. Jesus brings something revolutionary, counterintuitive, and subversive. Jesus brings an entirely different message. He comes and says, I have come to tell you not the same old law. I have come to announce that in the midst of your poor in spirit, lame, pathetic zero-ness, I announce God's blessing on you. How many of you need that? He meets you not in the place that you have gotten it together, but exactly at the moment of your not togetherness. Now, gospel is an announcement of your true identity. Gospel will always demand a new mind. See, for many of us, we are driven by the past. The past pushes us into the future. We know all the things that we are not. We know all of the mistakes we made, the sins we've committed, the things that plague us, the addictions, the habits. We know that the voices in our head that tell us all sorts of things. And so for many of us, life then is propelled from the back forward. We are pushed forward into the present and then into the future by all that has come before, and we know what that is. And so we basically have come to the conclusion that things will go forward being like this because they've been like that. Your history describes what has happened. It does not predict what will happen. The gospel is the announcement of who you truly are. And this announcement of who you truly are pulls you into a new future. The book of Ephesians does not begin with commands. When Paul writes to the church of Ephesians, the first 3 chapters, there are no commands. He doesn't tell you to do one thing in the first 3 chapters. What does he tell you? He tells them who they are. You have been purchased, redeemed, sanctified, rescued, renewed. You belong. You are loved. You've been purchased. He begins his letter to the Ephesians by telling them who they are, and once he's firmly grounded them in who they are, now that we've established that, we can talk about what you do. Because if I were to start by telling you what to do, you might think that you are doing these things in order to become favored or blessed by God. No. I'm telling you this is who you are, son, daughter. And now, he even says at one point, let us live up to what we've already attained. Now, for many of us, we don't trust this is true about ourselves. We have so bought into these messages that for us to trust a new word about ourselves, well, that's really, really hard. Which is why Jesus begins a lot of his teachings with what word? The word translates literally to change your thinking, to have a new mind. The word gets translated in English, repent. You know what repent means? You need a new mind. It's going to take a radical change. You're going to have to set aside this whole way you've been seeing things in order to see things how God sees things. And then he begins gradually to teach them more and more and more about what this new life looks like. Now, let's have some fun, shall we? Turn with me over to, let's just pick one. And, okay. Chapter 5, verse 38, page 4. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say, don't resist an evildoer. Basically, the word resist means don't violently resist. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. How many of you have heard this passage? Cheek. Yeah. And how many of you have heard the passage turn like, I guess I'm just supposed to turn the cheek, which sort of turns it into the first church of wimps, right? It's like the United Congregational Church of Wusses. I guess I'm supposed to turn the other cheek. So-and-so is being a complete, and I guess I'm just supposed to turn the cheek. I'm just supposed to. And it turns sort of, I guess I'm just supposed to. How many of you have heard this phrase used before? And you're like, is that what it means? So let's do this. We're going to have a little fun with this passage, turning the other cheek. I'm going to need 2 volunteers. I'd love to have oh, look at this young man. Could you please volunteer? Right. And this young man over here. Excellent. Okay. Okay. Now, so that as we're talking about Torah, as we're talking about a way, once again, the Christian faith, first and foremost, was a way of living in the world. Are we tracking on that? So we have to understand that when he comes for followers, disciples, who trust him and believe he's the master, and he's teaching them how to live in the world, how to see the world. So one of the things he says to them is he says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. If somebody's... Now, by the way, when you're reading Scripture, like when you're reading the story about Jesus' baptism, and all of a sudden the baptism starts mentioning descending like a dove, you instantly want to ask, wait, what's the descending like a dove? Where else does descending like a dove occur? Why all of a sudden is there a story about it? Why is there a dove at Jesus' baptism? Oh, wait. The first mention of a hovering of wings is Genesis chapter 1. Oh, wait, the baptism is Jesus is entering into the waters. Wait, the Bible opens with Spirit hovering like a bird and then entering waters. Wait, this writer is doing something here. Whenever you come across keywords, simply ask, where else do these words or phrases occur? So when Jesus says right cheek, why doesn't he just say if someone strikes you on the cheek? He said, in the first century, there were 2 ways to hit a person. Now, you'll please turn and face each other. This will be violent, but it's all for the glory of God and our entertainment. So, trying to think which one of you to make which one. Okay. You are the aggressor. You are mean and nasty. And you have struck this poor, innocent man. Now, there were 2 ways to strike a person. You could slap a person. A slap was for somebody who was beneath you. Remember, first century Jewish culture is deeply enmeshed with Greek and Roman culture because the Romans were a global military superpower who had conquered your small piece of land. Now, your land had a tremendous resource, and that resource was this little country of Israel sat between Europe, Asia, and Africa. So any trading that you needed to do, you had to go through this tiny area. So in the first century, a global military superpower had invaded a Middle Eastern country because of its resources. This global military superpower had more weapons than anybody had ever seen in the history of the world and referred to themselves as peacemakers. Does that preach or what, by the way? So, remember, as of everything Jesus does, there is a massive context, which is these Romans have stormed into your country and are making life miserable. Now, a slap was how you hit somebody who was beneath you. A slap was for somebody who was slave. In first century Roman culture, a woman. somebody, a minority, somebody from some ethnic, some exile, or some stranger who alien had come into your midst who was under your hire. A slap was somebody who was for beneath you. Slap. A fist was for somebody who was your equal. So a fist was for somebody else who was a rector. No, a fist. No, I was just totally improvising right there. What was I thinking? Okay. So, when Jesus says somebody strikes you on the right cheek, well, if Mike is the aggressor and he makes a fist, they struck you, can you fist John's right cheek? That's a little bit awkward, correct? Right? There is no sky hook punch. There is no Kareem Abdul-Jabbar punch that puts you like this. No. So if somebody has striked you on the right cheek, Mike can't really get a fist. What did they do? If somebody treats you as if they're less than you. Oh, and by the way, the right hand in the first century was for striking. Left hand was used for the maintenance of daily bodily functions. Yes. They did not have Charmin. Just saying. Oh, by the way, the phrases of the right hand of God. Right hand was seen as power and strength and control, sitting at the right hand. So right hand was symbolically power and the exercise of dominion. Left hand was used for daily functions. So there were, this is what I love about it. There were rules for how to humiliate and degrade people and do it properly. So you would never hit someone with the left hand, right hand. So Jesus says if somebody has struck you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek. Exactly. Okay, Mike, show us, can you slap his left cheek? Now try to slap you slap with the outside of your hand. Try. Right, you're going to break your wrist. Somebody slaps you, you turn to them the left cheek. Now Mike's option is only to do what? Fist. Okay. Picture a courtyard. And there are slaves. And the owner is punishing slaves. And the owner comes along and slaps one of the slaves. And this was happening all the time. You're a good God-fearing Jew, and a Roman slaps you. Here's what you do. Turn to them the other cheek. Wait. You're in a courtyard full of slaves. You're the owner, and all of a sudden, this slave does this. Now what do? If you punch him, what have you just said about you and the slave? Are we preaching or what? What is Jesus doing? I know it's tough. Try this next time. Now, if the owner hits you with the fist, the owner has just said we are equals. If the owner doesn't hit you, you won. Turning a cheek, that took our Latin American brothers and sisters would say, that takes some cojones. Are you with me? That took unbelievable courage and guts. Turning the other cheek was not a just take it. And by the way, if you've ever heard this verse used in the case of domestic abuse, that is such an unbelievable perversion of Jesus in the scriptures. It's inconceivable. If you've ever heard this scripture to mean you're just supposed to take it, turning the other cheek is not just taking it. It is brilliant, creative, subversive. You know what Jesus is teaching them how to do? When you are wronged by somebody and you are treated less than human, you are not to participate in any treatment of yourself that degrades you or treats you less than human. You are made in the image of God, and you turn a cheek. You do not stand for that. Now, Jesus is not done. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Romans came in, and the Romans essentially started buying things up all over the place. And what the Romans would do is you had these Jewish family lands. And so you and your father, your father's father, and your father's father have had this vineyard for years. Episcopalians, you like this vineyard. And you have tended this vineyard. But the Romans came in. Now, if you're going to conquer the world, you're going to need to build a what? An army, correct? You're the Romans. If you're a global military superpower, to conquer the world, it takes money because you have to pay for soldiers. So when you come into an area and you conquer that area, first off, Caesar believed that he had been sent from heaven to earth to bring about a universal reign of peace and prosperity because he believed he was a son of God. The phrase that Caesar used of himself was Lord, and so one of his main military propaganda was Caesar is Lord. Caesar also had a coin imprinted that said, there is no other name under heaven by which people can be saved than that of Caesar. So Caesar would come into your province, the Romans would crush your area, and then they would hold a sword up to you and say, confess Caesar is Lord. And then you would say, yeah, of course, Caesar is Lord. And then you would become a Roman province, and then they would tax you. They would take that tax money, and they would use that tax money to pay for more soldiers to go conquer more areas. All of this because Caesar believed he had been sent to bring about a universal reign of peace. Peace, of course, as I would say, depends on which end of the sword you're on. It is a peace through coercive violence. Are you with me? That's how the world is made peaceful, coercive violence. By the way, the first Christians came along and took this military propaganda and just changed it slightly. You'd go to their gatherings and people would say, hey, Jesus is Lord. Jesus is Lord. This is, well, yeah, what is your Jesus doing for the world? What kind of world is your Jesus making? Well, I'll tell you what, come by on Sunday and we have a meal. We get out the bread and the wine. But actually before we do that, we go around and we make sure everybody's rent is paid. And we make sure everybody has proper health care, in essence, right? They shared everything they had in common. And we make sure everybody has their bills paid. So I'll tell you what, you come to our little gathering of Jesus followers, and you see how we live, and you see how we care for each other, and then you tell me who's making a better world, Caesar or Jesus. Are you with me? I mean, this was what happened in the first century, essentially. Is Jesus Lord or is Caesar? This was the question. Jesus or Caesar? Coercive violence or sacrificial love? Which one's more powerful? Which one makes a better kind of world? By the way, side note, tangent, just my particular perspective. When America is known throughout the world as a Christian nation, but for a lot of people in different parts of the world, it doesn't feel like sacrificial love, but it feels a little bit more like coercive violence. Can you see where that message gets a little confusing for people? Just a little. All due respect to people who serve our country, all that. You can see where this gets a little dodgy. Now, good British word, Mike. Now, what had happened then is you had these good Jewish families that had had a piece of land for going back to the original entrance into the Promised Land. So you, the Shlomo family, has this vineyard, and they've had this vineyard in the family for 11 generations. But the Romans have come in. Some estimates are that by early first century, taxation rates were somewhere, Richard Horsley, one scholar, argues the taxation rates would have been somewhere between 80 and 90%. So this is, by the way, why Jesus keeps getting asked questions about taxes. Who do we pay tax to? We pay tax. This was a real pressing issue because these people are conquering. The Romans are conquering everybody in sight, and now we're going to fund more of this conquering. So what you had is the Shlomo family can't afford to keep the vineyard in the family. So in some cases, you had good Jewish families who are losing their family lands as these Roman conglomerates are buying everything up. You can see then we're a tax collector. All a tax collector has to do for this region is give X amount of dollars to Rome. As long as he gives X denarius to Rome, he can actually charge those people whatever he wants. You see where that gets really, really ugly. Now, You even, they believe, have cases where good Jewish families had had a vineyard in their family for 300, 400, 500 years, and they've lost the vineyard, and now the patriarch, whose job was to pass the vineyard on to his sons and daughters, is now early in the morning standing outside the city gate trying to get picked up to do day work on his own former vineyard. Some of them may have gotten picked up early in the day. Some of them may have gotten picked up later in the day. Are you with me? This is what was happening. Now, you had good Jewish people in serious debt to these Roman business people who were taking everything. Now, where is that cloak? Now, so what has happened, you have these very awkward situations where I'm just trying to do the right thing. I'm just trying to feed my family, but I've been taxed so much, I don't have anything left. And so at the city gate is where these sorts of transactions would take place. And so, I mean, now you're the wealthy landowner who's buying up everything in sight because you are a capitalist titan.
Thank you.
Because you're such a fan. Okay, and then you have this simple Jewish peasant farmer who's been working his vineyard, who's been trying to keep this family land. And he's at the city gate, and he has sued him because he isn't able to even pay his debts. Now, Jesus follows up the turning the other cheek with this. Turn the other cheek. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. Now, in the first century, generally men would wear two garments. They would wear an undergarment up against their skin, and then they would wear an outer cloak. So if somebody is literally coming after you legally because of your debt to them, and they are so harsh and ruthless, and they've got you up against the ropes, and you're at the city gate where these legal transactions take place, if they sue you to take your cloak, give to them your tunic also. Well, wait. If he starts to take off his tunic, what will he be wearing? Nothing. Right, birthday suit. Now, why is this interesting? Because in Jewish culture, the one who was naked was not the one who bore the shame. It was the one who viewed the person who was naked. By the way, when Noah gets drunk, the problem for Noah is that Noah's sons see him. So the worst thing in the world would be to be somebody who caused somebody to be publicly naked. So Jesus says, if you find yourself completely helpless and there's nothing left to do, and they are so going after you that they're taking your cloak, give to them your tunic also. Now, at this exact moment, when he begins to pull up his tunic, he's going to say, what?
Don't do it.
Wait. So now, the powerful one, the one who has him up against the ropes, is now asking him to do what? Who now has the power? Please stop. Da-na-na-na-na. Right? What has Jesus just done? He's allowed this person to retain their dignity. Really, you're going to take my cloak? You probably should take my tunic too. No, wait. He's just put the power in his place. Jesus then follows this up with a third teaching. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them too. Now, we generally think, oh, man, they just went the extra mile. Like, they not only brought a salad, they brought it with croutons, right? That's sort of the level at which second mile goes, right? I mean, they just went. And so we think about it as a generosity statement, which it is, but of a very different nature. And remember, cheek, cloak, and pack are in a row. Now, Roman soldiers carried packs with all their belongings. So there is this mean, nasty, heathen, pagan, British soldier who is in your midst. And it's hot, and it's dusty, and he has been carrying this pack, and he's tired of carrying his pack. According to Roman military law, you could ask a Jew, you could demand that a Jew, or in a country that you had conquered, could carry your pack. So imagine you are a good Jewish man, and it's Saturday, and you're headed to the synagogue with your family. It's a day when you do no work. You just celebrate with your family. And you're walking through your village to go to synagogue in order to dance with a Hazan, with the Torah, and then you're going to have a huge meal afterwards. A Roman soldier could come along and say, you carry my pack. Now, what carries packs in the first century? Mules. Right. A Roman soldier can come along and treat you like an animal. And there's nothing you can do about it. By the way, if you resist the Romans, the way that they do it is they crucify you. Like various cities, Magdala, Mary Magdalene, Magdala, the city, they estimate that at one point the Romans, in one fell swoop, crucified 2,000 people. So there were mass crucifixions. Like, this is what happens if you defy Rome. So if there's a soldier, and a soldier comes to you and dehumanizes you by treating you like a mule and gives you the pack. Now, Roman military law said that you could demand they carry your pack 1 mile, but they could not carry your pack 2 miles. So when you get to the mile mark, let's make this rug right here the mark from 1 mile to 2 mile. When you get to the 1 mile mark and you are carrying the pack, just keep walking. Because if this soldier's commander sees this guy carrying the pack more than 1 mile, what happens to him? He's in deep trouble. So he has treated him like an animal and said, here, carry my pack. He starts walking the 2nd mile. What is he doing now? Stop, please. Now, quickly. Correct. Where is the power now? Yeah. Thank you, John and Mike, for your brilliant thespian skills. Quick cut. In our world, I would argue that conventional wisdom says that when you are wronged or you are degraded, we are given 2 options. Option 1, don't do anything. Option 2, get revenge. Those are the options, correct? Somebody is rude to you, somebody is unkind, somebody is unjust, somebody says that thing about you. Generally, the culture gives us one of 2 options, right? Either do nothing. Now, do nothing is passivity, and passivity always leads to despair. We are about to head into Thanksgiving season. Many of you have relatives. How many of you know exactly what I'm talking about? Do I not say anything, or do I say something? You're out behind the kitchen with your husband, and you're going, she did it again. She said it again. She had to bring it up. I'm going to say something. He's like, no, don't say something. I'm going to say something. Well, at least wait till the pie. Right? You're really going to say something. If you're going to say something, seriously, please just wait, because the pie looks good. And what happened last time is we had to leave because it got awkward. Right? I mean, know exactly what I'm talking about. Here are the 2 options. The options are do nothing, which is passivity, which leads to despair. The other option is come out swinging, right? The other option is get revenge. What we do is somebody does something to us wrong. We then do something corresponding back and go, did you see what they did? The moment, of course, that you retaliate, you have lost all moral higher ground. Are you with me? Yeah. When you strike back, that is revenge, and revenge always escalates. You do not respond with a similar word. You respond with a word that has just a few more barbs, correct? We never tie the score. We win. You know about so-and-so and what they're saying about you, right? Yeah, I do. You know what they did last summer, right? No, I don't. Oof. I don't know if I should tell you. Right? Right? Exactly. They're saying that you're a moron. Well, they're a moron too. No, that's just like one-to-one. That's not fun. It's like Pong. No. What you do is you come back a little stronger because revenge always escalates. Now here's the mind-blowing thing Jesus does. He does not argue for passivity, correct? He does not argue for revenge. What Jesus does is offer a third way. This way is, number one, nonviolent. By the way, if you study nonviolence, particularly Mark Kurlansky, Kurlansky, has a book on nonviolence. It's a history of nonviolence. Basically, partway through the book, he says, now to understand nonviolence, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, etc., he says you have to begin with Jesus. He essentially argues the first person in human history who brought about a coherent way of thinking about nonviolence. Now, nonviolence is not weakness, it is strength. It is actually stronger than strength. Does that make sense? Turning the other cheek is not the strength of revenge, it is actually a higher, deeper, wider form of strength. Swinging back is easy. Turning the other cheek takes strength, but it is strength that is under control, as a fundamentally different kind of strength. Number two, third option does something very interesting. When you turn the other cheek, the brutal slave master can either hit you now or do what? Nothing. Third way, when you're about to the guy could say, you know what, I'm going to drop the lawsuit. This is getting awkward. The soldier may say, wait, stop. Oh, stop. Sorry, seriously. Third way creates the possibility that your aggressor may repent. When you immediately get revenge, you have created no space for the person who's come after you to change. Now, they may not. They may not ever. But the brilliance of third way is you have created the possible space for the redemption of your enemy. Are you with me? Think about our world. You bomb us, we bomb you. Right? You gossip about us, we gossip about you. This is the way our world works. You either do nothing, passivity, despair, or you do revenge that always escalates. Jesus gives people in very, very sticky, bloody, awkward social situations very practical, clear advice about how to reclaim their dignity. Think about the ferocious problem of spousal abuse in our country. What if there was a massive initiative to teach third way nonviolence? Don't you ever participate in anything that degrades your humanity. The possibilities are extraordinary. I met a guy in England who teaches Jesus' third way nonviolence to Palestinian high school kids. Because he said, here's what I'm doing. We're going to solve this thing by teaching the next generation a way to be strong and not stepped on, but create possibility for redemption and change. I think we actually need this kind of thinking more than ever. Because the first people who heard this sort of stuff were like, wow, that could change the world. What Jesus does is he comes and he teaches his disciples fresh new ways to think about the world. And aren't passive, aren't violent and revengeful, but are fresh new ways of engaging that take tremendous. And then I would say, fourthly, third way takes extraordinary creativity. Okay, what does the move here look like that isn't this, but creates this beautiful opportunity? It'll probably end up being sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's completely unexpected, sometimes it subverts the whole thing, but that's what he does. Yeah. You should consider following him. Let's take a break. Maybe if you have things you want to talk about, write them down so we could see where we should head after the break. And then we'll come back and keep going. Sound good? I'm excited. We're about a fourth of the way through. It should be fun. There's a couple, there's a crazy one here. Great question. Crazy driver cuts you off. Third way reaction? I found if you pull even with the driver and drive beside them for a while, just smiling and waving. Do you think it's bad if you sometimes are unsure about the existence of God? I think that you are human. Jesus didn't come and say, I give you absolutes. He talked about faith, correct? Which is a leap, right? It's a leap. You choose to believe a particular story about the universe and the world and God and where it's headed. What Jesus does is come to invite us into our full humanity. So, doubt is part of the human experience. Would you agree? I actually would argue that doubt means that your faith is alive and well. Doubt and faith are often seen as you just need to get rid of the one in order to have the other, but they are in some senses dance partners. Doubt is the reminder that you've actually leaped. Now, what you find in the scriptures is you find the full range of human emotion. So an example would be in the middle of the Old Testament is a collection of poems called the Lamentations. It's a book called Lamentations, and there are 5 chapters, and there are 5 poems. And God isn't really mentioned in these poems. There's like one character in the 3rd poem who comes in kind of like, God will save the day, maybe not. That's what you get. Now, the setting of the poems is the city of Jerusalem has been crushed by the Babylonians. By the way, there's a recurring theme in the Bible, which is global military superpower, 1, Jerusalem, 0. That's sort of a recurring theme. Egyptians, Syrians, Persians. By the way, the Assyrians were particularly brutal to the Israelites. The Assyrians crushed them time and time and time again. So, there is one story in the Old Testament about a man named Jonah, and God says, I want you to go to the Ninevites, the Assyrians, and bless them. Well, wait, you don't go to your enemies and bless them. Yeah, you can only go to your enemies and bless them if you've forgiven them. So the Jonah story has a very real, I want you to go to the absolute worst problem. I want you to go invite the Taliban to dinner. Because that will show the Taliban what God's expansive, redeeming love looks like. No way. I'm going the other way. I'm going to Texas or whatever. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the Jonah. I don't know why I picked Texas. I don't know why I picked Texas other than I just want to bless other countries. I always say that I would meet somebody from Texas. Oh, it's so nice to meet somebody from outside the States. That is a different world, isn't it? Go down there and it's wonderful. Those of you from Texas will line up afterwards to greet me with your... So, what I find fascinating about the poem Lamentations is God... So the Babylonians have conquered and crushed Jerusalem, poked the king's eyes out, crushed everything in sight, and there's just these remains. And in the middle of these remains is this poetry between this woman calling, does anybody see my pain? Because when you've been wronged, that's what you want to know. You want to know if anybody sees. Did anybody see this? Does anybody see this? Did you see this? Did you see my pain? At one point, the man says to the woman, your wound is as deep as the sea. I mean, these poems speak to the deepest issues of human suffering. And I would argue in our culture, we don't really know how to lament well. Like we will see footage of a funeral somewhere in the Middle East, and the people are weeping and throwing themselves on the coffin and shouting and screaming, and we think, oh, how primitive and barbaric as we stuff it. Doing well, thank you. All things work together. And we're actually a wreck. And so what Jesus comes is he invites us into our full humanity, to the full human spectrum of emotion. And so lament, which many times we need to be doing, we don't have ways to do this. So one of the powerful things of a church is a place ideally where you can come and experience the full range of human emotions. Sometimes we ask sad people to sing happy songs. And sometimes there are spaces, the beauty of the church calendars, there are spaces where you pause and you feel and you properly grieve. And you, my daughter has just outgrown her crib. There's a major moment in the Bell household because we are going to see if this whirling dervish can stay in a mattress. This will take, Herculean strength and power. But I was taking apart her crib, and I had it halfway apart, and I stopped and took a picture of it because it was a good thing. Like if she's 3, if she's 4 or 5, 6, she's 8 or 9 and she's in her crib, that's not good. Would you agree? Okay. So, it is good for your kid to outgrow their crib, and yet why is a good thing sad? Why, when you look at pictures of your kids and you see how they were when they were younger, it's sad, and yet you don't want your kids to repeat 3rd grade and 3rd grade and 3rd grade and 3rd grade, correct? It's like they grow up and it makes you sad, and it's also a good thing because you don't want them to stay the same age because that would be socially embarrassing. So the truth is, what you are doing in those moments is you are grieving. And here's the really subtle thing. You are grieving something good. Take the bunch of employees, and they all went through business school together. They all went through school together, and then they worked their way up this company. But then one of them got the promotion and is now in the corner office. And they used to all work in cubicles and go to lunch together, but now one of them got bumped up, and the one that got bumped up to the corner office has gotten everything she wanted, and yet in some strange way she's sad, because now she goes to lunch with everybody else, and things have changed, right? She doesn't have the same jokes from the cubicle farm. And so she finds herself strangely sad, and she can't figure out why. It's because change is always a form of loss. When things change, when your kids get older, that is a change, and you lost something. You may have gained 8 years old, but you lost 7. And so it's interesting. We have all these good things that are happening to us that grieve us, and yet we don't really have ways to do this. What Jesus invites us into is our full humanity. And so we are invited in to just be with that and to be present with that. And so as you follow this Jesus, one of the things that happens is you are more and more, one writer says, you are more and more present to your own depths. You are more and more aware of what is going on inside of you, and you understand the very healthy. So I've experienced, for some people, they have doubts. By the way, if you watch the news and you don't from time to time have doubts about a good, loving God who's caring for us all, are you watching the news? This is a very real part. Jesus, my God, why have you forsaken me? The scripture is full of people saying, where are you? In essence, this is normal part of the human experience. And when religion says, oh, no, you leave that stuff outside. We come in here shiny and happy and affirm all the right stuff. What it does is it cuts you off from the very, by the way, a lot of good art comes from over there as well. It cuts you off from your very real experience as a human. So the idea is a church is a place where we can come and be present to each other in the depth of wherever we are at and whatever we are going through. And what we discover is that we meet God there, that God is in that too. And God can be found there, and God can be found in that. And that thing that you would have stuffed, repressed, and denied, you went into the heart of it and discovered that God was there too. This is the mysterious message of the cross. When Jesus is on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? In that moment, God is present in God's absence. God is in the pain. Jesus there discovers God is there as well. See, oftentimes what happens is people live with a binary view of reality. God is good, so what do I do about the evil? God's over here, so we're left with all these giant questions. What the Jesus story does is puts God right in the middle of the good, and God is somehow present there. And just at the moment of the cross when you think it's all over and it's gone and it's lost, he appears and says, God was up to something the whole time. Are you with me now? Yeah. One of the things Jesus does again and again is he talks about serving, which I think is extraordinarily speaks to the world that you and I live in. When you decide to serve, see, most of us have a center of gravity. The center of gravity is us. And so our center of gravity basically extends, of our life, extends to those things which affect me and my well-being most. The interesting thing with a marriage, when you fall in love, is all of a sudden there is now someone else in this center of gravity. There's now somebody else who means more to you than yourself. But one of the reasons why Jesus keeps talking about serving, and oftentimes when he talks about being serving and being a servant, there's sort of this, oh, I guess I'm supposed to serve, right? There's that sort of like, oh, I guess, okay, nursery or ushering, what is it? Serving is about something far, far larger. It is about your view of the universe. When you serve and you orient yourself around a cause, and your time and your energy and your money and the thing that you have, your being. When you serve, what he's saying is you are orienting yourself around more than just yourself. You now have a larger sphere of gravity. You now have others. And when you do that, then your world gets bigger. And so what happens when we only serve ourselves is our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so when he keeps speaking of serving, he keeps speaking of, I came to show you what it looks like to live in a bigger and bigger and bigger world in which you are tied up in more and more and more people. Now this is fascinating at a whole larger level, because this Jesus story, notice with me, turn with me to book of Genesis chapter 12. Because the Jesus story is rooted in a much, much earlier story. In Genesis 12, we have a man named Abram. And Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham, and I'm one of them, and so are you. So let's all clap our hands. Is that how it goes? So that's all clap our hands. Whoop, there it is. Ice, ice, baby. And so Genesis chapter 12. That's awesome. I don't know where that came from. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I won't show it to you right now. Just go. We'll find it later. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those that bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now there are concentric circles here. First off, Abram, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to, in that particular culture, it was like sheep and goats. But I'm going to bless you. You will live with my favor. So we will be tight. That's my translation of the Hebrew. You and I can be tight, bro. Now, you and I can be tight, bro, for a reason. Because from you, I'm going to make a tribe. Now, ancient Near East like this, they understood tribes because tribes was your sense of belonging. There is you as an individual, but you found your worth and value in your tribe. Nowadays, we call that college football. Okay, so tribal thinking, and by the way, tribal consciousness comes through blood. Why do you cheer for that team? Because my daddy cheered for that team. Correct? This wasn't an intellectual decision. You are not cheering for, where are we in Florida? You are not cheering for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, you're not cheering for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think that's pretty, say that. Yeah, I was going to say you're not cheering for them because they're, but it's just you're not cheering for them. By the way, are any Jaguar fans here? Oh, it's Buccaneers. Tampa Bay, are you Tampa Bay Buccaneer fans? Yes. Oh, you are? Go Bucks. Go Bucks. How are you doing this year, by the way? That spread like a bad rumor. Here's how that sounded up front. How are you guys doing this year? By the way, recently, a couple years ago for the first time, I was asked to give the pregame talk to the Green Bay Packers. So I did this whole thing on quantum physics. Because I was like, they don't want to hear about, David and Goliath and the battle is yours. They don't want to hear all that rubbish. You know what I mean? Like, they hear all that sort of go rah-rah stuff. So I did this thing on complementarity and entanglement and quantum theory. and they loved it. So will you come back and talk about quantum physics more? So I brought a giant whiteboard before the game and did this whole thing on energy flow and what they're learning about the Higgs boson. And at the end, it's like, all right, go, win, or something. It was so much fun. So much fun. The coach comes up afterwards. Oh, man, you're blowing my mind. And he walks out. That's all he says. Blowing my mind. I should tell you what I told them. It was awesome. It was really funny, to me at least. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah. So, tribal, that rabbit hole, I went way down that rabbit hole. That wasn't, there's a fine line when a tangent becomes a rabbit hole, and then you're literally trying to find your way back out. So, you have your identity, who you are, your rootedness and grounding in gospel favor of God, Jesus, who redeems, rescues, blesses, our trust that this story about us is actually true. Then you have belonging, which is your tribe, which is your people, like a church. So this is where I belong. Tribe sometimes has a blood. They are Catholics from Boston. They are Episcopalians from, sometimes it's just, this is where I came from. This is where my people, this is where I'm raised. This is where I went to school. This is where my parents went to school. Sometimes tribe is built around belief. So our tribe, we're nothing like each other, but we believe the same things. So tribes can have different ways in which they affiliate. But what you see here in the call to Abraham is his own individual grounding. Then there is his tribal belonging. But now in the ancient Near East, tribes existed in order to preserve themselves. In the ancient Near East, the goal of a tribe was to stay alive, stay healthy, get more sheep, goats, and horses, right? So for a tribe, its highest driving motive was preservation. Tribes inherently default to self-preservation. Very different than churches. Now here's the really, really interesting thing with Abraham, is in a tribal, conscious-centered culture, where the goal of a tribe is to protect itself, which is why in Genesis you see all those alliances of tribes. It's all, they're more powerful than us, but if we trade with them and they marry our daughters, then we can stand up against them. But your tribe, Abraham, will bless all people. So your tribe will be the actual language. How's it actually say it? Oh, thank you. You have one. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Abraham, I'm calling you to be the father of a tribe that's unlike any other tribe the world has ever seen. Your tribe will not have as its highest goal its own self-preservation. Your tribe's goal will be the blessing of all the other tribes. Are you with me? Now, in consciousness theory, they call this transcend and include. Your call includes your own identity, and it includes your tribal identity. I'm not saying that you're not going to have a tribe. It's simply that your calling is going to include your tribal affiliation, but then going to transcend it to an even higher calling, which is to bless all the other tribes. Now here's why I say this. Have you ever heard somebody describe a church as a country club? Here's why people, I think, use that language. You can smell when you when you brush up against a tribe. You can smell, and we do it in 1,000 little intuitive ways, whether this tribe's highest goal is its own self-preservation, or whether this tribe exists to bless other tribes. Are you with me? I think you can pick it up among people. Is self-preservation this person's greatest drive? Or do they see themselves as here for a reason to bless others? Money is where we find out where we are on this quite quickly, as individuals and as communities. Money is one of the very tangible ways you can sort of get at actual numbers. But energy, attitude, We have all been given energies. Are my primary energies being spent on self-preservation, or are they being spent beyond? And by the way, self-preservation is not at odds with this, because we need food, play, joy, good wine, vacations. It is beyond that. Is there any higher purpose to my life than simply my preservation? So the challenge for a church is simply to ask, what are we doing beyond our own self-preservation? Because otherwise, we will essentially shrivel up and get stuck at this tribal association and not move to world. So I would argue the rest of the Hebrew Scriptures is these Israelites constantly losing the plot. One of the prophets, Isaiah, comes along and says, you are a light to the Gentiles. And by the way, Gentiles is a way of saying everybody else who wasn't Jewish. Essentially says, you exist. The prophets come along and they say, you exist to be light to all the other tribes. And then Jesus comes along and he says, don't hide your light under a bushel. He's intentionally using the word light. He's essentially calling Israel back to a higher consciousness than just their own preservation. Makes sense? So what you see often then within a church is you have multiple levels going on. First off, one of the things I discovered is I did a whole series a number of years ago when I was a pastor in Michigan. I did a whole series on caring for the poor. And what happened is a whole number of people in our church had a huge problem with it and would send emails and came up afterwards saying, but does God still love us? What about grace? Are we still saved? And I couldn't figure out, wait. I'm talking about us having a mission beyond ourselves. And I was, wait. Identity, belonging, mission, individual, tribe, world. Are you with me? And what I realized is you start with the individual grounding in gospel grace, God's favor. Make sense? Then you move to, now, let's get a bunch of us together. Let's get a bunch of students and disciples together. We need each other. There are 43 one another's in the New Testament. Pray for each other, care for one another, bear each other's burdens, Facebook each other. There's 19 of them. I think there are 19 individual ones that are repeated roughly 43 times. So we need each other. You need a tribe. So you need your own grounding. You need a tribe, but then a tribe needs a cause, needs a mission, needs a purpose beyond itself, or it loses its sense of why we're here and what are we doing. I would argue that you need grounding as a person in God's love, the freedom we have in Christ, our new identity, new creation. We need to belong. We need some people who can, no disciple can learn in isolation. And then we all need together something. One of the things we did in the church in Michigan I was at is there was a local urban public school, elementary school. And somebody had done a bunch of research and discovered that the population in the county jail was directly related to the literacy rates in public elementary schools. And they discovered that if a kid had learned to read by, it was like third grade or something, by the time, third or fourth grade, by the time they got to a particular age, their course and trajectory into the world, it was literally like this or this. And they realized if you could get public school kids reading by this age, you could statistically, provably lower the population in the county jail. So there was a whole network of people who were simply getting people, do you have an hour a week to help a kid learn to read? And there was one school, we just said, we'd like to get every single kid a mentor. It's not complicated. You don't need any training. Can you show up once a week? And what happened, of course, is people would start volunteering. They'd do their once a week, find out the kid's story, find out the kid's mom's story, start getting involved in the family. I remember one family, extremely well-resourced family, had their bodyguard driving them downtown to this urban school. Bodyguard waits out front while they go in and mentor. They start asking questions, and the mom can't afford a bunch of things because the single mom doesn't have a GED and is trying to make enough money and working 3 jobs, etc. So they realize, we need to get this mom a high school equivalency degree. So this woman gets in her car, bodyguard drives her back home. She goes online to try to figure out how to register in the city for a GED program and finds it too hard to navigate. Now here's the real thing about rich people. When they get righteously pissed off, and I use that phrase specifically, stuff happens, right? And it literally became this massive source of spiritual rebirth. Like, these people turned their time, energy, emails, and money to a person who wants to get a high school degree so they can get a better job should be able to do it. And if I can't navigate it, how can the single mom? And these people got they get stuff. It's kind of fun to watch. Because if you're on the receiving end of their wrath, their loving Jesus sort of wrath, woo! What's interesting about those people is some people can work at a one-on-one level, but some people, because of experience, education, resource, some people can go for the whole system. You know what I mean? Some people can go, okay, this isn't just an individual needs help, this is a systemic issue that somebody needs to deal with. And what that does is it turns faith into something really, really interesting. Jesus is up to something here. We're following him, and he's taking us into neighborhoods we haven't been in before. And so it involves time and energy and money and connections and resources and lots of emails and meetings, and things get really, really, really exciting. So the really interesting question then is identity, belonging, mission. And when you get a room full of Jesus disciples who belong and they're learning together, and they start asking questions like, what would it look like for us to tackle a problem? What would it look like for us to have a mission together? What could we do in the world? Well, that just changes everything. I think one of the greatest problems in our culture is boredom. We have everything we were taught we were supposed to work hard to get. How many of you know what I'm talking about? And the strange thing is that it sometimes can get really boring. And I wonder if Jesus talks about serving so much because he realizes the joy is found when you say yes when he says to follow him, and you jump in and you find that mission and that cause. You can smell it in the air when you're in the midst of a tribe that has a calling beyond just themselves. It's extraordinary what you find. Now, I could keep going with some questions. Mike, what do you think? We have a little bit more time together.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Okay, so just keep going. What is your mission in LA? A tough city to make followers of Christ. I've actually seen all sorts of things. When it's dark, then the light is just that much more clearly light, by the way. Let me tell you what I'm up to. Okay, great. Then I'll just tell you. Actually, a bunch of doors opened up that are just the kind of doors that don't normally open up. But I was a pastor in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and some doors opened up. The thing I love to do is I love to take this Jesus message and share it with people. And I love to think up creative and compelling and new ways to share it that will engage people who aren't listening. And I got some opportunities to do some work in television and sort of started to think, well, wait, what if you could talk about the things we've talked about tonight here only on mainstream primetime television? That might really, you might be able to really do something. That could be really interesting. And I ended up, there's some agents who said, will you come talk to all of these agents who are sort of big deals? So I went and talked, and they're better than the cliche you have of Hollywood agents. And they'll say things to me like, I don't believe like you believe, but I really like this Jesus you're talking about. Could you say more about this Jesus? Yeah, I can, to be honest with you. there's a very popular show called Lost. Any Lost fans here? The main writer and producer of that show, he and I are working on a show, and we're very, very excited, and we begin some of the formal pitch process in the next couple of weeks. But we're trying to do what hasn't been done and to do a show on spirituality. Our central premise is that we have every variation of political show, from Rachel Maddow to Fox to everything in between. What starts conversations around the dinner table and around dinner parties? It's politics and spirituality, politics and religion. And we have every single variation of politics, and we have nothing about spirituality. So someone needs to do that. So my family and I moved to the LA area because that's what I'm trying to do. So picture whatever it is that, like we were going on tonight, mixed with a Lost, throw in some Colbert and Jon Stewart into a blender with maybe a touch of Letterman and Ellen, and we'll see what happens. So that's what we're trying to do because we think people are ready for it. I think people want to be inspired. I think we want hope. And I actually think it needs to be a Christian pastor, because generally Christians are sort of the obnoxious ones trying to just get everybody into their club. But if there was a Christian who was leading the discussion with all sorts of people and wasn't threatened, but was actually inviting and finding all sorts of holy, sacred space where people didn't think there was any, I think it might be a beautiful thing to watch. Besides, I like to laugh. So that's what we're doing. So I'm sort of getting a crash course on how all that works, which is just great. Sometimes I'll just be like, okay, that's crazy. Do you guys realize that? Well, it's just how we've done things. Yeah, but it's crazy. So that's what we're doing. And it all came about from the Follow Me thing. We started this church, and it was really big, and it was solid and secure, and our life was cruising along, and all of a sudden these sort of doors opened up, and it was like, oh my, I think we're supposed to, yeah, my wife was right there with me, so we did it. Yeah, so hopefully at some point you'll see something on television. And like, for example, one of the pilot episodes we'll be pitching is the third way, turn the other cheek thing. So hopefully in not much time, I'll be in Oprah's office doing the turn the other cheek thing. And I'm going to make her cry. I'm going to Oprah. Can we edit that part out if you're filming this? That's just ridiculous. How do we get 70 to 100% of the world and church instead of the 30% going now? Well, just be really clever next. Here's what I think you do. I think you tell your story. And I think you ask who's been pushed to the edges, who's been marginalized, who needs help, who's lonely, who's thirsty, who needs a friend, and you ask God to show you what's my work look like in the world. And it'll probably be quite simple, actually. Just the next thing. And when you do that, and then when the occasion comes and people ask you, why are you like this? And you say, because Jesus has moved me in a way, and I can't quite explain it, but giving back is the only thing that makes sense. Remember, even in talking about the cross, what the writer says is for the joy set before him. So I believe joy is actually the most exotic, addictive substance in the world. When you see joy, this is not happy, everything's fine. This is joy. Joy's got a bass note. Joy has a subwoofer. Joy isn't just, hey, everything's fine, everything's great. Joy is, everything's falling apart, but for some reason I have a peace that transcends understanding. Are you with me? Yes. Yeah, so I think first and foremost, how do you get people in church? First and foremost, are you smoking what you're selling? See, because sometimes what happens, there might be a better metaphor. I'm sure John or Mike come up with one. But here's the problem. Hey, come to our building on Sundays and hear this life-changing message about peace. Although we aren't spending as much time as possible with our kids, and we aren't getting the help we need so that our marriage is thriving, and we aren't actually doing the hard work to understand our addictions and our family of origins, but just come anyway. And people go, why? I don't see it. It's not a call to be perfect, but you cannot invite people into something that you aren't doing what you can to pursue. So What happens is when there's a church full of people who are actually letting Jesus clean them out and restore and renew and reconcile them. That's what's compelling. That's people. What have you all tapped into? What is it? Can I come? Yes, you can. And then secondly, you surrender the outcomes. I have no idea if your neighbors will ever engage with spiritual things or not. I don't know. But I do know that you can pray and you can set out to become a particular kind of person. And oftentimes it will not happen in success, it will happen in suffering. You will go along side by side with somebody for years and never feel like you got through to the stuff that matters. And then one of you suffered and all of a sudden you're there. I know more people who believe because they suffered, and when they suffered, there was a particular group of people who were there for them. Are you with me? So for those friends you have, how many of you have self-sufficient friends who don't need anything, everything's going great? That lasts for a little while. No one bats 1,000, right? And then at some point, they will need somebody to be there, and you will be there, and you will be a non-judgmental, non-reactive, loving presence. How can we serve you? And they will never forget it. And it will be an open door, and it will lead to all sorts of extraordinary things. I have loved the past year because I was a pastor my entire working life, since early 20s. And then a year ago, we moved to California, and we moved into a neighborhood where nobody knows what I do or who I am. So I can just make up, when they say, what do you do? I can just make up something. By the way, I've been all sorts of things over the past year. And I'm in this extraordinary thing where all the things I've been preaching, I get to quietly go about being. And I'm having more fun seeing all the fascinating conversations I get into. And there are people, literally, I've had multiple interactions with them, and they're like, oh, by the way, what do you do? And I'll say, I'm a pastor, and I announce the gospel of Jesus Christ. Really? It's awesome. Love it. I love it. All of it. How often do you wear your hair in a mohawk? I don't, rarely. That's awesome. I'm not aware that I had a mohawk, but maybe I did, and I just don't know it. Okay, then there are a couple other questions. There's one question about what about free will? Whenever I hear questions about free will, I always ask the person, oftentimes I'll just say, so what seminary do you attend? Even though I don't know who asked it, because oftentimes it's a seminary student. I'll have them. One time I had a guy stand up. I was like, you asked a question about free will? And he's like, yeah. And I said, is that your girlfriend sitting next to you? Yes. Did you choose to date her, or did she choose to date you? Yep. Next question. Okay, can we wrap? We have 8 minutes.
Yeah, 10.
10. Oh my goodness. Okay. Let me put together a message right now. Okay, good. Done. For years, the question was, what are things made of? What is the thing that makes everything else? What's the building block of the universe? Now, the Greeks, philosophers, Democritus, and roughly 2,500 years ago, he posited, well, there must be something that is the building block of which nothing smaller can be divided. And he called it would be something that was undividable. And the word divide is the word temno, and the word a means not. So there must be something that's atemno, undividable, from which came the word atom. So for roughly a couple thousand years, scientists have said there must be something that makes up everything else. Roughly 1897, scientists discovered an electron, actually a fragment of an atom. And they discovered there are these things that make up the universe called atoms. Atoms are very, very small. Millions of atoms lined up side by side would be as wide as a human hair. That small. They then discovered, well, I think an atom is to a tennis ball as a tennis ball is to the sun in terms of size. Small. They discovered, okay, these atoms make up everything, but an atom is actually made up. It has a center called a nucleus with protons and neutrons, and then it has electrons which aren't in the center of the atom, and that all these little subparts keep moving around. But then they invented a stronger machine, and they were discovered that actually protons and neutrons and electrons can be split into smaller particles. So the initial thing was, well, we'll figure out what that smaller thing is, then we'll figure out how we got here, and we'll figure out what the universe is made of, and then we won't need any sort of God explanation because we'll have the thing that everything's made of. What they discovered is that an atom can be split into a smaller piece, but then they discovered that those smaller pieces, they developed an even more technology, can be split into smaller pieces. So they discovered that electrons can be split into quarks, muons, pions, gluons, leptons. They discovered at this point they have been able to divide an atom roughly 150 times. Smaller and smaller, and each time they're like, okay, quick, we got it. We got the small thing that makes everything else up. We got it. Oh, actually, we can now divide that. They now have leptons. They even have, I think it's muons, that appear for 1/10 of a millionth of a second and then disappear. So they're now saying, well, actually, they've discovered, well, they assumed that an electron would simply orbit the center of an atom in much the same way that planets orbit in the solar system. But then they discovered that it doesn't really work that way. They discovered that an electron disappears in point A and reappears in point B without traveling the distance in between. And like, wait. And then they discover, wait. You mean that these particles, because they're constantly moving, revolving, an electron can go do a 16-mile lap, I think it's 47,000 times in like a millionth of a second. Fast. They're constantly moving all over the place. You and I are made of atoms. These atoms, which can be divided down to 150 times, contain all these particles. These particles will disappear in point A, reappear in point B without traveling a distance in between. They then discovered that a particle travels all of the possible paths between A and B, and it only reveals the one that actually took when it's observed. They then discovered that you can take an atom, you can split it in half, and you can put one half in New Jersey, and you can put one half in California, and if you reverse the spin of the half on the East Coast, the half on the West Coast at that exact second will reverse its spin as well. And they don't know how. Because we have all communication for us is through signal. So it's two cans and a rope, it's sound waves right now, it's Facebook, it's phones. We all have a way things are. They discovered at the subatomic level something called entanglement, that when two atoms are bonded and they separate, they are aware of what the other atom is doing without any communication between them. Because, see, we were trained in what's called a classical view of the universe. Object in motion stays in motion unless acted on by an outside force. Flashbacks to 9th grade, right? We were trained that there are laws to motion that work in predictable ways, that the universe has laws that it works according to. What happened roughly 110 years ago is you had what's called the quantum revolution, when Niels Bohr and Max Planck and a group of pioneering quantum theorists essentially said, okay, first off, there's always been this haunting thought that the universe goes forever big, but we're taking the universe about at the most small level, and what we're discovering is that it goes small forever small. And what we're discovering is that none of the conventional laws for how the universe works work. There are electrons, like if I'm sitting in a chair and you spin me around, if you spin me once around, I'll go 360 degrees and I'll come back to sitting in the chair facing forward, correct? There are electrons that in order to, you have to spin them twice to get them back to center. Like everything, Niels Bohr said, if you are not offended and shocked by quantum theory, then you aren't studying it. Well, wait. The modern premise was, give us enough time, and we'll be able to explain everything, and then we won't need God. But at the quantum level, they're like, actually, what we're discovering is that you can study a particle, and you can guess where the particle is going to appear, but you don't know. It's going to do whatever it's going to do, and the best you can do is predict some probabilities. Otherwise, the universe at its core has some sort of inherent unpredictability, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, in which it does its own thing. Now, you are sitting in a chair. That chair is holding you off of the floor, correct? If it's not, we have a problem. If we were to take apart your chair, wood, foam, velour. That's what my sweatsuits are made of. No. And thread. If we were to take apart that wood, down we would discover ultimately molecules, and we would ultimately discover that that wood is made of atoms. Same with your elbow, your hair, and your eyebrows. If we were to take apart your chair, and we were to take apart that wood and get down to the atomic level, what we would discover is that it is made of atoms which are coming and going billions and billions of times a second. Now, an atom is 99% empty space. If, this is quantum scientists, you were to take all of the empty space out of the atoms in the universe would fit in a sugar cube. I love saying that to a crowd of people, because people are like, pow. So what happened is you and I were trained in a modern world that said there is the hard, fast, physical world, correct? Earth science, rocks, stuff you can get a handle on. And then there is this other realm, the spiritual realm, which may or may not exist, correct? Your atheist friends at the dinner party are like, how can you believe in a God you can't see, right? Because there's the hard, empirical, evidence, proof, scientific method world, and there may or may not be these other dimensions, correct? Quantum physicists are now saying, well, actually, everything ultimately in the hard, fast, secure, wooden pew world is actually energy in relationship. So your car and your jewelry, it is actually moving, pulsing, frenetic energy that happens to be in relationship at this moment. Energy in relationship is at the core of the universe. And this is not theologians, this is scientists. 3 months ago, Time magazine, the Higgs boson and the search for the latest subatomic particle is spiritual. Genesis begins with a divine being speaking, a ferocious electric energy, speaking it all into existence. What did the first Christians say about Jesus? He holds all things together. So for many of us, we were raised in a world in which faith is going one way and science is going another. And so we picture it like two lines going away from each other. Are those lines actually the bottom of a circle that are beginning to curve up, back, towards each other? So the Apostle Paul said this. He said, "He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it." Now, he's a good Jew. And whenever Paul, by the way, Paul, very clever, crafty fellow. You ought to read some of his books. He says, "He who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it." Well, wait, a good Jew would be like, hold on, began, good work, complete. Those words, those three words are pretty big words. Those words occur somewhere else. They occur in Genesis 1 and 2. The Bible, in the beginning, God creates a work, and God keeps saying, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good. Thus the heavens and earth were completed in all their vast array. So when he says, he who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it, a good Jew who knows Torah, let me hear you say Torah, would be like, wait. Began good work, complete. You didn't just randomly pick those words. That's how the Bible began. Wait. What's Paul saying? Here's what I think Paul's saying. Paul is saying when you say yes to Jesus, when you open up to the grace of God in your life, when you give God your energy, your time, your money, when you take your whole being and you say, here I am, Buber, there are yes and no positions to life. Yes. He says, when you do that, the very energy and life force that brought the whole universe into being and continues to sustain it gets unleashed in you. That's, I think, what he's saying. You say yes to that. There isn't God and then the rest of the world. It's all a gift from the God from whom all things flow. When you say yes to this grace, when you as a church say, okay, we're here, we're Episcopalians in Clearwater, yes, use us. He says you're saying yes to the very creative energy of the universe that formed the whole thing. It gets unleashed in you, and then you get unleashed in the world. Well, that could change the whole thing, and you in the process. Dear God, I bring my brothers and sisters before you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to see what's going on in Clearwater. I ask for my brothers and sisters who are here tonight who are struggling with pain, heartache, frustration, a lack of self-control, addiction, grieving. I ask that you would speak to each of us a fresh, new word of life and power and vitality. I ask that you would meet us not in our attempts to get it together, but exactly in our point of not having it together. Please meet us in our zero-ness, our lameness, our patheticness, our weakness. Please meet us in the places that we are most frustrated. We ask that you would speak to each of us a fresh word about ourselves, about our tribe. I ask you to speak a fresh word to this church about just what's possible. I think of this city and the needs and the broken hearts and what could happen with a group of disciples who are committed to saying yes to the invitation to follow Jesus. That's electric. That's loaded. That's really, really, really thrilling. So I thank you that we could have this time tonight, that you could speak to each of us whatever it is that we need to hear about the one who begins a good work in us, being faithful to get it done. We thank you for Jesus and Eucharist, for the body broken and blood poured out so that we could have life. We want to be a living, breathing Eucharist to the world around us. And we thank you for giving us the strength and guidance and vision to do that. And in the strong name of the resurrected Christ, everybody said, Amen. Thanks for letting me be with you. Grace and peace be with you.